Alright, y'all, so today I want to do a quick review of the New 52 T Titans Volume 1, It's Our Right to Fight. Gosh, what a stupid title that volume is. That being said, in this video I want to cover my honest thoughts on Volume 1 of the New 52 T Titans. I recently got the chance to read this for the first time, and yeah, I just want to give you the good and bad and the ugly and my overall thoughts. Now, going into this series, at least the New 52 T Titans, this was one of the few New 52 titles I heard a little bit about before going into it, and mostly it was all negative stuff. I heard that the New 52 T Titans sucked, that it was a bad representation of T Titans, and that it could be basically a lot better in other continuities and versions. And, you know, in terms of my familiarity with the T Titans, I wouldn't call myself a super fan of them. I really enjoyed them as a kid and a little bit as a teenager, but I'm basically am more familiar with the more, you know, centerpiece and bigger heroes like Superman, Batman, so on. T Titans are pretty cool though, and I remember liking the cartoon as a kid, and I'm always, like I said before, more familiar with that lineup of heroes, which includes Beast Boy, Raven, and Cyborg. Now, the New 52 T Titans is not that lineup. There's very much, you know, mostly all really new stuff, different characters put in. Beast Boy and Raven, I believe, show up later, but they're not in this first volume. And Cyborg is also a big centerpiece of the Justice League. So, yeah, kind of crazy stuff, a brand new team. The team in this volume is mostly consisting of Tim Drake as Red Robin, Wonder Girl, Kid Flash, Bunker, Skitter, Solstice, and I guess kind of Superboy. So like I said, a little bit of a different lineup this time around, but not necessarily a bad thing, and I wanted to give this thing a shot. And overall, you know, I may get some hate for saying this, I thought it was okay, Volume 1 at least. There are some really good things about it, so let's get into my pros. I think, for one, the story is really well paced. Now, people have described this, at least the first, you know, a few issues of this series, as it's really taking its time, it's not really doing anything, it's being very slow to introduce everybody. I think at least every few issues, like, a new character gets introduced, but honestly, I don't mind that approach to writing in comic books. I think, you know, if anything, one of the good things about this comic, at least for me reading it, is the pacing I felt very, very nice. It's very slow at points, and it definitely takes its time and introduces characters, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, it builds up its world, it introduces all of its characters properly, and continues the story along. And I really enjoyed the pacing, how we're really given time for really to explore each of these characters and their personalities and give full introduction to them beyond or except Superboy, but that's only because he had his own title in the New 52, which I think was a huge mistake that they didn't include a sort of issue to explain his story, or they could have maybe included a issue from his title in these trades of the volume for New 52 T Titans, if that makes sense. Like, they could have included something like they did kind of like with Supergirl. That being said, I really enjoyed the pacing of it, and I do think some of the characters are very enjoyable. Bunker, which I've never heard of before the New 52, I'm not even sure if he's a character that came before it, but he's said to be like a gay superhero, which is pretty awesome. He has a kind of funny power. He basically is able to create psionic bricks and throw them at people and create constructs. So in a lot of ways, it's like a Green Lantern, but he can only do bricks. So, you know, take that as you will. But he's a really enjoyable character, and I really enjoyed him in this comic. He really gives energy and life to a pretty stale series of events that happens in this comic. And Tim Drake, who I think in the anime or cartoon, he was Dick Grayson. I could be mistaken. Maybe it was always Tim Drake, but, you know, he's here this time around. He has a brand new costume with the metal wings, which I don't know if that was actually before. I know in the original comics before this, he had like a do-rag on. Personally, I really enjoy the costume upgrade in the New 52, and it's kind of what I've always thought Red Robin to look like anyway. He's okay here. He's pretty stern. He has some funny parts here and there, but I think he lacks the charisma of the anime or the cartoon version of Robin. But that being said, I did enjoy him in the comic. Wonder Girl's not too bad. I thought that her story was a little bit interesting. I do think they could have gone more into her backstory, but she was fine. Solstice can't really make out a real personality for her quite yet, and it's kind of unclear why she looks like that, especially since I kind of looked at how she looked like before the New 52 Titans, and she looked drastically different. The Kid Flash is here, Barry Allen, who, that's all really cool stuff. I think he was actually really well introduced, and he's kind of like the opening superhero to this comic. He's not bad. He was pretty enjoyable. There's also another superhero called Skitter, I think is what she's called. Kind of a weird creature that is kind of like the Hulk. Like she turned, like it's like a normal teenage girl that turned to some kind of creature and has some kind of cocoon. Her powers are not really well explained despite having an issue brought to her. And to kind of summarize the events of this comic, Red Robin is kind of putting together, trying to save metahuman teenagers because this organization called Nowhere is trying to capture them all. He's trying to sort of pull together a team of them. They eventually call themselves the T-Titans to stop them. Superboy is initially working for Nowhere, trying to capture Wonder Girl, and eventually switches sides by the end of the comic and kind of joins the T-Titans because he kind of realizes the sort of error of his ways. The T-Titans also get their asses whooped in this comic, which is going to be a common theme in the New 52 T-Titans. And then the comic just kind of abruptly ends, at least the first volume. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the story's kind of I like how nicely paced it is, and I do like how it introduces a lot of these characters. I just think there's a bit too much in terms of it doesn't feel like teenagers, and the way some characters are written feels really strange. I'll get to some of my dialogue, but yeah, like I said, for positives, I like the pacing. I like how the characters are introduced. I think the artwork, too, is beautiful. I really enjoy the artwork here. I think a lot of New 52 titles have great artwork. This reminds me a lot of those early 2000s Ultimate comics from Marvel. I really enjoy the artwork and a lot of the designs of the characters. Even though I do think you have to remember these are teenagers. It's a little bit questionable how some of the females and stuff are drawn. I'm just saying they're teenagers. A little bit weird, and I'm sure there's a lot of male artists doing this stuff. But regardless, really beautiful artwork. Like the artwork was stunning. The paneling was really good. The dialogue I think is pretty decent for the most part. I just think in terms of negatives, I just think there's not really too much to latch onto in terms of story-wise for this. There's not a big climactic victory that the T-Titans have in this first volume. They try, Superboy attempts to capture Wonder Girl and absolutely gets he basically whoops all their butts. I think, personally speaking, what really should have happened in this instance is Superboy, despite how powerful he is, especially in the New 52, there could have been a way where Tim Drake really shows himself as a leader and Red Robin, and basically uses all of the superpowered abilities of the team to basically take down Superboy. And then he learns the error of his ways and switches sides. Instead of, him whooping all their butts and then eventually later kind of changing his mind. I just think, like I said before, there's not really a sense of victory here, which I think was a huge missed opportunity, especially since this is going to be the main team. And I also get it too, like I said, this is kind of a situation where, these characters are brand new to this. They are not clearly experienced as superheroing. But, I think there could have been more of a victory here. And I even feel like Earth 1 T-Titans did this whole, Nowhere kind of angle at least a little bit more interesting. So yeah, I mentioned that already. The comic also ends very abruptly, which is, it kind of ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger. That was not really that satisfying, but, then again, that's kind of how DC collected the trades for the volumes. So I'm not exactly complaining. Superboy 2 doesn't really get too much of an introduction. I think you needed an issue to explain his backstory because the comic doesn't really go out of its way to explain itself, and I think that was a little bit of a massive disappointment right there. And some of the writing, too, feels a little bit weird. The writer kind of... Like, there's one scene in particular I remember where Tim Drake is, looking at Wonder Girl's things, if you know what I'm saying. And then she's like, "Oh yeah, they're real." I'm like, did we really need to know that? Was that essential information for this new Teen Titans group to get across? Some of the dialogue, especially, considering the fact these are teenagers, feels really weird and gross at points. I think, like I said, some of the writing needs to be improved, and there's some really weird scenes in this. And I think it really sets off a really weird vibe, and not a great one at that, for the entire comic. So yeah, overall, to wrap up my thoughts, the New 52 Teen Titans, for me, it was decent. Not the greatest version of the Teen Titans. There's way better versions. Is it as bad as Teen Titans Go? I mean, that's a kid's show, but I mean, it can at some points. Sometimes it's not as bad. I kind of go 50-50. Overall, I thought it was a decent experience. I didn't dread reading this. It was okay. Just could have been a lot more better writing overall, better dialogue, definitely less uncanny and weird moments, especially with that one scene where Wonder Girl, mentions to Tim Drake, "Oh yeah, they're real." I'm sorry, we did not need to know that. Ridiculous. But yeah, my thoughts on Volume 1, the New 52 Teen Titans. Alright, peace, y'all.